Film is an expensive and complicated medium. When storytellers suddenly realize that their movie is heading for an unsatisfying conclusion, it can result in some exhausting and expensive behind-the-scenes headaches for everyone involved. Thankfully, those beloved movies swapped out their iffy endings just in time, for the most part. At the beginning of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the eponymous hero is caught between two women, his too-young-for-him girlfriend, Knives Chow, and the mysterious Ramona Flowers. Early on in the film, he cheats on Knives with Ramona, and then breaks up with Knives altogether. But his new relationship with Ramona is far from smooth.
If we're gonna date, you may have to defeat my 7 evil exes.
You have 7 evil ex-boyfriends?
7 evil exes, yes.
How does the story end? Well, when Edgar Wright and Michael Bacall were writing the script for Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, they had a unique problem. It was based on a 6-part comic series by Brian Lee O'Malley, but only 5 of the 6 books had been released at the time. There was no ending for them to adapt. The initial ending they penned had Scott realizing that Ramona wasn't right for him, and so he and Knives got back together. The ending was shot and appears as a bonus feature on the Blu-ray.
Well, I'm buying stuff.
Yeah. And stuff.
But something about it didn't feel right during filming. In addition to test audiences not liking it, one of the loudest voices against it was Ellen Wong, the actor playing Knives, who didn't want her character going back to a man who cheated on her. In the final ending, despite their problems, Scott and Ramona decide that they're going to try to make it work, and Knives learns to stand on her own.
Buying stuff.
Yeah. And stuff. Go get her.
This ended up matching the resolution of the comic series, the last volume of which was released less than a month before the film hit theaters. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, was a project that was constantly shifting around during all stages of its production. There was an early version of the script where protagonist Jyn Erso was a sergeant, an enlisted soldier in the Rebel Alliance, instead of a criminal who was pressured into joining the rebellion. In some versions of the script, she and Cassian actually survived the battle on Scarif. This incarnation of Jyn was the one that filmmakers thought they would be going with when much of the merchandise was created. Because of that, some of the packaging for the toys still refer to Jyn as Sergeant Jyn Erso. However, there was another key change to the ending that was made very late into the filming process. While looking over the footage they had filmed for the climax, director Gareth Edwards and editor Jay Buzz Olson realized that Darth Vader, despite being introduced in an early scene, never really got a chance to do anything cool in the third act. They decided he needed an action scene of his own, and so the now iconic Darth Vader hallway fight scene was shot just 4 months before the film was released. As a filmmaker, Terry Gilliam is known for 2 things: making amazing, surreal movies and having terrible luck while trying to make amazing, surreal movies. The story of his 1985 film, Brazil, showcases both of these traits. Brazil tells the story of Sam Lowry, who lives in a totalitarian, futuristic bureaucracy, but dreams of being a winged hero who fights monsters and rescues damsels. After a series of misadventures, Sam is captured by the authorities for associating with criminal revolutionaries. In the original ending, he seemingly breaks out of captivity and flees the city to an idyllic countryside. But then, there is a sudden reveal that he hasn't fled at all. He is still in prison, merely dreaming of escape after being lobotomized. The Criterion documentary The Battle of Brazil tells the story of what happened next. Distributors felt that US audiences would want a happier ending.
And I would get calls from the editor occasionally wanting my input. What do you mean you want my input? Yeah, but we're saving your film. No, you're killing my film.
Against Gilliam's wishes, an editing team created an alternate cut that ended with Sam actually escaping, foregoing the reveal that it was just a hallucination. This was the version of Brazil that was originally premiered in the United States. Fortunately, this is not the end of the story. Gilliam, unhappy with this result, started hosting private screenings of his version of the film. His cut started getting positive critical attention, eventually winning the Los Angeles Film Critics Award for Best Picture. This made the studio finally cave and release the original version to American audiences. When Sean Harris was cast in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation as the villainous Solomon Lane, he had only one request, without which he would not agree to do the film. He said, quote, "Promise me you'll kill him. I don't want to be in 5 of these movies." Writer-director Christopher McQuarrie agreed. By the end of the film, protagonist Ethan Hunt would kill Solomon Lane. The problem? Late into process of filming, McQuarrie made an upsetting discovery. IndieWire reports that the writer-director admitted, quote, I didn't have the event in the movie that made me want Ethan to kill him. In fact, McQuarrie felt it would be more satisfying if Ethan tricked Lane, defeating him without violence, and brought him into custody alive. After some pleading, McQuarrie eventually got Harris to agree to a script change. In the end, Harris, like his character, was trapped. It hasn't been 5 films yet, but Solomon Lane did indeed have to return in Mission Impossible: Fallout. Pretty in Pink tells the story of Andy Walsh, played by Molly Ringwald, a high schooler caught between 2 love interests, the preppy hunk Blaine and Ducky, the boy next door. Originally, the plan was for Andy to learn that people who are rich and attractive, like Blaine, can sometimes be shallow, and people who don't look like much are often the real treasure. That's of course Ducky we're talking about. However, once filming began, Ringwald and McCarthy ended up having undeniable chemistry. Ducky, meanwhile, came off as a deeply weird dude with strange fashion sense, odd mannerisms, and an almost stalker-esque obsession with Andy. The film was shot originally as written, with Andy ending up with Ducky, but audiences who were shown early cuts of the film just about lost their minds. As director Howard Deutsch put it, the girls in the test screening didn't go for that. They wanted her to get the cute boy, and that was it. So we had to reshoot the ending. The final version of the film did indeed have Andy ending up with Blaine, but the change happened so late into the process that the novelization of the film still has the original ending. This change never sat well with writer John Hughes. Wanting another chance to properly execute this story, he wrote Some Kind of Wonderful, which has a very similar setup to Pretty in Pink, but this time ends with the lead choosing the normie over the hottie. Realism be damned. World War Z's original ending, which was actually filmed, was an enormous and expensive action set piece, with protagonist Jerry Lane, played by Brad Pitt, fighting his way through hundreds of zombies in Moscow's Red Square. However, when watching it back, the filmmakers felt that it just wasn't working. The story began with a strong focus on Jerry's desire to reunite with his family, but it ended with a meaningless bloodbath and no resolution to his main goal. In an interview with Vanity Fair, second unit director Simon Crane said that the biggest problem was that, quote, it wasn't character-driven anymore. Writer Damon Lindelof was brought on to take things back to the drawing board and do something that had never been done before on a film of this scale. Write a completely new final 40 minutes to an already finished film. In the version that hit theaters, the new climax is confined to an abandoned hospital. The action is small, with Jerry as a frightened everyman, rather than a swaggering badass. Most importantly, in the end, he's finally reunited with his family. Even though Ridley Scott's Blade Runner is considered a classic nowadays, it was not always a favorite of sci-fi cinephiles. When it premiered, reviews were lukewarm, and some last-minute studio meddling may have been to blame. In Scott's initial cut, the storytelling was gloomy and mysterious, especially the last shot of the film, which showed our protagonists on the run from the law, boarding an elevator to an uncertain fate. According to the making-of documentary On the Edge of Blade Runner, initial test screenings indicated that this highly ambiguous plot did its job a little too well, because everyone who saw it felt highly confused.
What the f*** am I watching here?
The studio pressured Scott to add not only a voiceover narration to make things clearer, but also a new ending that showed the heroes driving through the sunny countryside, indicating that they'd found some semblance of happiness. The production was out of money, but Scott was suddenly in need of some idyllic landscape footage. He turned to his friend Stanley Kubrick, who happened to have 17 hours of beautiful unused B-roll that he originally shot for the opening titles of The Shining. Despite everyone's best efforts, the fix ended up pleasing exactly nobody. Some still thought the movie was confusing, while others thought the new voiceover and ending were too corny. It wasn't until 1992 that Ridley Scott released a version of the film more in line with his initial vision, and lovers of confusing gloom finally got the flick they'd been dreaming of. Speaking of Stanley Kubrick, the notoriously intense director is no stranger to switching things up at the last possible minute. How last minute are we talking exactly? Well, he changed the ending to The Shining a week after it came out. The initial ending of the film featured an additional scene between the two now famous final beats of Jack freezing to death in the hedge maze and the closing shot of that spooky group photo back in the Overlook. This diversion showed Wendy and Danny recovering in a hospital and talking to the police about what they experienced. This scene was actually shown at the premiere and in the film's initial limited run in Los Angeles and New York. Then, before the wider release of the film, Kubrick decided the scene was superfluous and sent out assistants to actually travel around to dozens of theaters and physically cut out the scene, re-editing the film reels that the theaters have been showing. The scene is not currently available anywhere, since all copies of it were theoretically destroyed. Only a few set photos still exist, but the evidence of how late this change occurred can be seen in that two characters from that scene, a policeman and a nurse, still appear in the final credits, despite no longer being in the movie. So, in summation, Blade Runner's team took footage from The Shining to create a new ending, while The Shining crew also crafted a new ending for the horror film by pacing around the country and taking razor blades to films, effectively becoming, pardon the pun and I can't believe I'm about to say this, Blade Runners.
Oh, I get it.
The classic 90s slacker comedy Clerks tells the story of the day in the life of a sad sack convenience store clerk, Dante Hicks. Even though the film garnered critical acclaim, jump-started the career of director Kevin Smith, and introduced the world to Jay and Silent Bob, the original ending told a drastically different story. In its first public screening at the independent feature film market, Clerks ended with one last customer entering the store as Dante was closing up for the night. He was an armed robber who, without warning or fanfare, shot Dante dead, emptied the register, and walked away. Talk about a dead-end job. In the making-of documentary Snowball Effect: The Story of Clerks, Smith admits that he did this because he didn't know how else to close the film, and because he was copying the structure of Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which also takes place entirely in one day and ends in tragedy. Brian O'Halloran, the actor who played Dante, hated this ending, as did Smith's mentor, filmmaker John Pearson. Pearson suggested simply cutting that scene and ending on the happy note that preceded it. That's exactly what Smith did. And so, all the future screenings ended in a way that better fit the tone of the rest of the film, and left the door open for a sequel. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite films are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.